The frozen planet turned slowly under a sky filled with pale light. Wind howled across the empty plains, carrying sharp ice that cut through anything left uncovered. Inside a half-buried wreck of a small ship, a woman sat holding her child close to her chest. She was not human. Her skin gave off a faint blue glow, her eyes shimmered like soft glass, and her breath came out in misty silver trails. Her name was Lyra, and her child Aaron was all she had left in this world. The ship's engines were dead, the power cells frozen solid, and the temperature outside had dropped below anything her kind could survive for long. The silence inside the broken ship was only broken by the faint sound of the storm pushing against the walls. Lyra tried to start the small heater again, but it only sparked once and then died. She pressed her child closer, wrapping him in the remains of a metallic blanket that barely gave warmth. Aaron's eyes were half open, his small body shivering. Lyra's heart raced. She had already sent out a distress signal hours ago, but she did not know if anyone had heard it. The storm had been growing worse with every hour, and her voice messages went unanswered. Her mind went back to the moment of the crash. They had been traveling toward a neutral station to seek help after their colony ship was attacked. When their vessel was hit, the emergency pods were thrown into the planet's atmosphere, scattering across the ice. Lyra and her child had survived the fall, but the landing had broken the navigation beacon. Still, she had repaired the signal module with what was left of her tools. The beacon now blinked weakly, one pulse every few seconds, reaching out into the void, hoping someone somewhere would notice. Outside, through a small crack in the hull, she could see the white blur of the storm. It was endless, full of sound and fury. Each gust shook the wreck a little more. The temperature gauge on the wall dropped lower again. Her own hands were numb now, her energy fading. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, her body conserving strength for her child. Her people were known for their calm spirit, for their wisdom and songs. But now in this cold grave, even her calm was breaking. She whispered soft words in her native tongue to the child, songs about light and warmth, stories her mother once told her when the sky was kind. Aaron's small hand clutched her sleeve, his eyes barely open. "Cold," he whispered in their language. She smiled weakly and stroked his hair. "I know, little one. I will keep you warm." But she knew it was not true for long. The power reserves were gone. The last heat cell had already been used an hour ago. There was nothing left to burn, nothing left to hope for, except the tiny blinking light of the distress beacon. Far away, beyond the reach of the storm, a human outpost circled the same planet. Inside its metal walls, the control room was quiet except for the hum of machinery. A young technician noticed a faint signal blinking on his monitor. He almost ignored it. It was weak and erratic, the kind that came from space debris or dying sensors. But then the system translated the frequency. Distress code, non-human origin, life signs detected. He turned toward the commander's station. "Sir, we're receiving a weak distress call from Sector Epsilon 4. Looks like a crashed ship. One adult, one juvenile life form detected." The commander leaned forward, scanning the data. "No way anyone's alive down there in that storm," he said. "That sector's a death zone." Still, one person in the room stood up. His name was Captain Aaron Voss, a rescue pilot known for doing what others wouldn't. He stared at the screen for a long moment. The blinking light seemed to speak to him. Years ago, he had seen another signal like this, too late that time. His daughter's shuttle had crashed in a similar storm on Mars. He had promised himself he would never turn away again if someone needed help. "I'll go," Aaron said quietly. The commander frowned. "Voss, you'll never make it through that storm. The visibility's zero. We can't risk another loss." Aaron shook his head. "I'm not risking anything. I'm doing my job." He turned toward the hangar, his steps heavy but steady. The cold suit team tried to stop him, but he just smiled and said, "If someone's out there, I'll find them." Within minutes, he was inside a crawler, a small rescue vehicle built for extreme weather. The engines roared to life, lights cutting through the darkness as he set a course for the signal's location. The ice plains stretched endlessly ahead, the wind slamming into his vehicle again and again. The crawler shook, the metal creaking under pressure, but Aaron kept going. The display showed the signal fading in and out like a heartbeat slowing down. He gripped the controls harder. The snow outside looked alive, swirling and shifting like a living creature made of frost. Back inside the wreck, Lyra could hear the ship moan under the storm's pressure. The beacon blinked slower now, its light weaker than before. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a silent prayer to the stars her people once worshipped. She didn't pray for herself anymore, only for her child. And then, through the roaring of the storm, a faint sound reached her ears, a low rumble that didn't belong to the wind. She thought it was her imagination at first. But then she heard it again, closer this time. Something was moving out there, something alive fighting against the storm. Her heart began to race. She pressed her face to the small window and saw a distant shadow moving through the snow carrying a faint light. For the first time since the crash, hope flickered in her chest. Ed watching the stars with him. Her laughter used to fill their small cabin on Mars before the accident. The night her shuttle went down, Aaron had begged to join the rescue mission, but they had told him there was no chance of survivors. They were wrong then, and he didn't want to be wrong now. Somewhere out there another child was waiting, and this time he wouldn't stop until he reached them. The crawler's sensors beeped softly. Life sign detected. Faint, the computer voice said. Aaron leaned forward, his heart racing. He adjusted the controls, moving toward the coordinates. The wind hit the side of the crawler again, almost pushing it off balance, but he forced it steady. The snow made a high-pitched whistle against the hull, and for a moment, everything outside looked like one endless sheet of white. He saw nothing but light and wind. Then, after another few meters, the radar showed a sudden spike, metal structure nearby. He stopped the crawler and switched on the external lights. Through the fog of snow, a dark shape appeared, half buried in ice. It was a small ship, broken in two, its hull torn and covered in frost. The beacon's pulse came from inside it. Aaron's chest tightened. Someone was still alive in there. He grabbed his oxygen mask and thermal gear, opened the hatch and stepped out. The cold hit him like knives. Even with the suit, he could feel the temperature cutting through. His boots sank into the snow with each heavy step. The wind howled, pulling at his body, but he leaned forward and kept walking. The light from the crawler faded behind him as the storm grew thicker. Every step was a fight, but he moved forward one at a time, watching the faint blinking of the beacon through the fog. Inside the wreck, Lyra's eyes shot open. The sound was clearer now, metal against metal, someone outside moving. She pressed her child closer and listened. Her heart was beating fast, her breath coming in short gasps. Was it rescue or danger? Her people had been hunted before. Humans were not always kind to them. But she felt something different now, something that made her hope again. She stood up slowly, holding Aaron in her arms, and moved toward the door. The ship groaned as the storm pushed harder. A shadow moved outside, a tall figure covered in frost and snow. Lyra's throat went dry. She stepped back and tried to wake her child fully. Aaron opened his eyes weakly and whispered her name. She smiled and brushed his cheek. It's all right. Stay with me. Outside, Aaron reached the ship's door. It was frozen shut, a thick layer of ice sealing it completely. He pulled out his portable heater and aimed it at the metal. The flame hissed, cutting through the frost slowly. His fingers were numb even through the gloves, but he didn't stop. When the ice finally cracked, he pushed hard. The door opened halfway before it jammed again. He forced his shoulder against it, pushing until it broke free. The wind rushed in behind him, and he stumbled inside. He turned on his headlamp. The light cut through the darkness, revealing shattered panels and broken seats. Then he saw them. The alien woman was crouched in the corner, her child wrapped in her arms. Her eyes reflected the light like mirrors, and her face showed both fear and exhaustion. She looked fragile, but there was a strange grace in her movements, like a creature from another world still clinging to life. Aaron raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "I'm here to help," he said, his voice muffled through the helmet. Lyra didn't understand the words, but she saw his eyes. There was no hate there, only worry and something she hadn't seen in humans before. Kindness. She didn't move as he knelt down beside her. He opened a small thermal pack and placed it near the child. Warm light spread across the room. The child stirred slightly, letting out a faint breath. Aaron checked the scanner on his wrist. The child's pulse was weak but steady. He smiled behind the mask. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to them. Lyra reached out hesitantly, touching the side of the heater, then looking back at him. She pointed at his chest, then the door, trying to ask something. He understood enough. "Yes, we're going home," he said softly. He motioned for her to stay close as he prepared to move them. The wind outside roared louder than ever, but Aaron felt a strange calm. He had found them. Against all odds, he had found life where no one believed it could exist. He lifted the child carefully, wrapping him in his own thermal blanket. Lyra followed closely, holding onto his arm as they stepped into the storm. The snow hit them like a wall. Aaron guided her toward the crawler's lights, which now looked like tiny stars in the white darkness. Each step was heavy, but he kept moving, one slow push at a time. Lyra stumbled once, but Aaron caught her before she fell. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. All of it was new and confusing to her. Lyra didn't know the human language, but she understood actions. This man had walked through death's storm to reach her. She had seen the way he covered her child with his own coat, the way he ignored his own pain to keep them warm. Her kind had always been taught that humans were dangerous, wild creatures who destroyed everything they touched. Yet sitting here, she could see no monster. He looked more like a man burdened with memories. Aaron checked the scanner again. The signal for the outpost was weak but still reachable. Almost there, he whispered to himself, though he knew the woman couldn't understand. His voice was hoarse, his throat dry from the cold air. He looked over his shoulder and saw her eyes watching him carefully. For a moment, neither spoke, yet something passed between them. Silent trust. Outside, the storm continued to beat against the crawler. The windows fogged, the metal rattled, but the machine held. The little child stirred, letting out a weak cough. Lyra held him closer, her long fingers brushing over his face. The boy's small hand reached out and touched the air where the heater's light glowed. He smiled faintly, and it made her heart ache with both relief and fear. She knew her people's bodies were not built for such cold, and even now her own strength was fading. Aaron noticed the child's breathing was uneven. He pulled out his med kit and carefully took one of the oxygen packs. He placed the mask gently over the child's mouth and pressed the start button. Lyra tensed, ready to pull her child away, but Aaron raised a hand, shaking his head softly. "It's okay," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's just air. It'll help him." She didn't understand the words, but his tone made her pause. The light on the oxygen pack blinked, and Aaron's breathing slowly eased. The boy's chest rose and fell in rhythm again. Lyra exhaled a shaky breath, her eyes softening. She looked at the human again, then at the pack, then whispered a quiet word in her own language. It meant, "Thank you." Aaron smiled weakly, not understanding her words either, but feeling the emotion behind them. "You're welcome," he said quietly. He leaned back against the cold wall and watched as the storm began to fade on the horizon. After a while, exhaustion caught up with all of them. Aaron kept his eyes open, fighting sleep, but his body was losing the battle. Lyra noticed him shaking. His hands had small cuts from the cold, and his lips were pale. He had given them his heat blanket, and his own body was paying the price. She hesitated for a long moment before moving closer. Carefully, she took the edge of her own cloak, thin but still warm, and draped it over his shoulder. Aaron looked up, surprised. She didn't say anything, just nodded slightly and went back to watching her child. For the first time since he landed on this planet, Aaron laughed softly. "Guess we both don't listen to warnings," he muttered. Hours passed before the storm finally broke apart. The sky cleared to reveal a faint sun, a pale circle behind the thin clouds. The crawler's sensors picked up the beacon of the human outpost again. Relief spread through Aaron's chest. He turned to the woman and pointed to the display, showing her the small glowing mark that meant safety. "Home," he said, tapping his chest and then pointing ahead. Lyra tilted her head, watching him. She repeated the sound slowly. "Home." Her voice was soft, unsure. Aaron smiled and nodded. "Yes, home." She looked out the window as the world outside turned from white chaos to endless blue ice. It was strange to her that a human word could feel so warm. After another hour of travel, the crawler finally approached the outpost. Towers of metal rose from the snow, their lights blinking like stars in the dark. Aaron activated the communicator. "Rescue team inbound. 2 survivors, non-human and juvenile. Both stable. Request medical team ready." The voice on the other end crackled. "Copy that, Voss. We've got you on radar. Proceed to Bay 3. When they arrived, the heavy doors opened slowly, letting warm light flood into the crawler. Lyra shielded her eyes, unused to the brightness. Aaron stood up carefully, feeling his joints ache, and reached out a hand toward her. She looked at it, unsure. Then she took it. His grip was gentle but strong. Together they stepped out of the crawler. The air inside the hangar was filled with sound, voices, footsteps, machines humming. Humans in white suits approached quickly, carrying medical scanners and blankets. They spoke fast, some staring curiously at the alien woman and her child. Lyra tightened her hold on Aaron, her body tense. Aaron stepped between her and the others, raising a hand. "Easy," he said. "They're with me." The medics nodded and moved slower. One of them smiled at Lyra, offering a soft blanket. She hesitated but took it. Aaron guided them toward the medbay, staying close as they walked down the long hallway filled with lights. Everything here was strange to her, the bright walls, the constant hum of energy. But she stayed calm because the human stayed beside her. When they reached the small room, Aaron helped her sit on the bed. He placed his hand on his chest and said, "Aaron." Then he pointed at her, trying to ask her name. She blinked, then touched her own chest. "Lyra," she said softly. He nodded. "Lyra," he repeated, the name strange on his tongue but warm to say. For a moment they just looked at each other, two beings from different worlds who had shared the same storm. Then the child stirred again, opening his eyes and looking up at both of them. His small hand reached toward Aaron's sleeve, clutching it lightly before falling back asleep. Aaron smiled. "You're safe now, little one." "That frostbite is starting on the adult human," she said, glancing at Aaron. Her voice was calm but firm. "He needs attention before he's in serious danger." Aaron shook his head lightly. "I'm fine. Just get the child checked first. That's all that matters." The medic raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She turned to Aaron and began adjusting the monitors carefully. Aaron watched her work, keeping a hand on his chest, feeling every rise and fall of the child's breathing. Lyra's gaze never left Aaron, but every so often she glanced at Aaron, curious and hesitant. She had no words for what she felt: confusion, gratitude, and something warmer, almost like trust. Time passed slowly in the medbay. Outside, the storm continued, but inside there was only quiet and warmth. Aaron's eyes opened fully for the first time since the crash, and he looked at both Lyra and Aaron with wide, blinking eyes. He reached his small hands toward Aaron, then looked at his mother. Lyra bent slightly, letting her child rest against her chest again. She whispered softly, words that were comforting even if Aaron could not understand them. Aaron studied the child's face. He looked small and fragile, but there was a spark in his eyes that gave Aaron hope. "He's strong," Aaron said quietly. "Stronger than he looks." Lyra tilted her head, listening to his words. She didn't understand the language, but she felt the meaning in his tone. There was no threat, no malice, only care. Her fingers brushed against her child's face as she murmured again, and Aaron caught the softness of it, even if he could not know the words. The medic returned, handing Aaron a warm drink. "You need this more than anyone," she said. He took it without argument, sipping slowly, feeling the warmth seep into his frozen chest. Lyra watched the motion with wide eyes, the movement strange yet human. She leaned closer to her child, speaking softly to him, then glanced at Aaron again. After a moment, the child stirred once more. He raised his small hand and touched Aaron's sleeve lightly. Lyra's eyes widened at the action. It was an unusual gesture for her people, showing acceptance and trust. Aaron smiled softly, careful not to move too quickly. "That's okay," he said quietly. "It's okay, little one." She watched him speak, seeing the care in his face and hearing the gentle sound of his voice. She didn't understand the words, but she knew the meaning. Slowly, she relaxed, letting herself believe that they were safe for the first time since the crash. Hours passed, and the cold outside became a distant memory. Aaron rested while the medics treated his frostbite. Lyra kept Aaron close, finally allowing herself a small sigh of relief. She looked around at the humans, at the equipment, at the walls of light, and realized that this world, this human colony, was different from what she had been told. It was not all destruction and danger. It was possible to find kindness here. Aaron finished his treatment and returned to the side of the bed. He crouched down slightly, keeping his hands visible to show no threat. "We're safe now," he said, voice steady. "You're both safe." Aaron blinked up at him, then looked at his mother. Lyra smiled faintly and whispered softly again. Aaron could not hear the words clearly, but he felt the gratitude in her tone. He reached out a hand toward her, and after a moment of hesitation, she placed her fingers lightly against his. It was a small gesture, but it carried meaning. He nodded once, understanding the trust she was offering. For a human and an alien, the distance between worlds seemed smaller in that single touch. The medics left them alone for a while. Lyra rested her head against the wall, her child curled against her chest, and Aaron leaned back on the other side. The three of them were quiet, listening to the soft hum of the machines. The storm outside continued, but inside there was warmth and safety. Aaron opened his eyes again and looked at both of them. He reached a small hand toward Aaron. Lyra smiled softly and allowed the child to touch the human's sleeve. Aaron held his hand gently, careful not to pull away. In that small gesture, a bond was forming, one built on care, courage, and survival. Time passed slowly, but it was not empty. It was full of small moments, warmth, breathing, trust, and quiet understanding. For Lyra, it was the first time she had felt hope since the crash. For Aaron, it was the first time he had felt purpose since the storm began. And for Aaron, it was the first time he felt safe in the arms of another. Both human and alien. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the med bay, three lives were healing together, their bond stronger than any storm could break. The med bay was quiet now, filled only with the soft hum of machines and the slow, steady breathing of Aaron. Lyra sat with her child pressed against her chest, still feeling the warmth of the human she had come to trust. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the air was calm, almost gentle. For the first time since the crash, she felt that they might survive. Aaron leaned back in his chair, watching them carefully. The child's small fingers clutched the blanket, but his eyes followed Aaron's every movement. There was curiosity there, mingled with caution. Aaron knew he had to be patient. This was not a human child. His instincts and understanding had limits here, and trust could not be forced. He simply stayed quiet, giving the mother and child the space they needed. After a few minutes, Aaron's eyes opened fully. He stared at Aaron for a long moment, his gaze clear and bright. Then he reached out, his tiny hand brushing against Aaron's sleeve. Lyra's eyes widened slightly, and her fingers rested lightly on his arm as if to guide him. Aaron smiled softly, careful not to startle the child. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe here." Lyra listened to his words, not understanding the meaning, but sensing the kindness in his voice. She had never met a human who moved with such care and patience. Her people often warned that humans were unpredictable, but this one had crossed a frozen wasteland to reach them. That simple fact made her heart lighter, though she remained watchful. The child stirred again, reaching toward the small heater in the med bay. Aaron moved closer and adjusted it so the warmth spread evenly over the blankets. Aaron's small body relaxed immediately, and he gave a quiet sigh. Lyra smiled faintly, brushing her hand over his hair. For hours she had been afraid he would not survive, and now she could finally allow herself to hope. Aaron glanced at the monitors, checking Aaron's pulse and breathing. Both were strong now, steady and regular. He let out a quiet breath he didn't know he had been holding. "You're doing well," he said to the child. Aaron looked up at him and gave a small, almost shy smile. It was a simple gesture, but for Aaron it was everything. He nodded to Lyra, trying to convey that the danger was over, that the child was safe. Lyra studied his face, noting the warmth in his eyes, the gentleness in his movements. Slowly, she placed her free hand lightly on his arm, a gesture of gratitude and trust. Aaron met her gaze and nodded. Though they did not share a language, the meaning was clear between them. Life had been preserved, and for now they were safe. Time passed, and the storm outside began to fade. The wind still howled at the edges of the colony, but the blinding snow had lessened. Aaron took a deep breath and leaned back, exhausted. His hands were stiff, his muscles sore from the journey through the ice plains. But seeing the child safe made every hardship worthwhile. Aaron stirred again and looked around the room, his small eyes bright and alert. He reached for Aaron once more, his tiny fingers brushing against the sleeve of the human's coat. Lyra smiled softly and allowed it, understanding that her child was beginning to accept this strange human as a protector. It was a small moment, but one filled with hope and connection. Aaron carefully lifted a small blanket to cover the child more fully, ensuring that he would stay warm. Lyra's hands rested over his, guiding him gently, a silent cooperation between mother and rescuer. Outside, the colony's lights shone faintly through the fog, a reminder that safety was no longer far away. The medics returned, bringing additional supplies and blankets. They moved efficiently, checking the child's condition and making sure that the mother was comfortable. Aaron stayed nearby, observing quietly, ready to assist but allowing them to maintain their space. Lyra's eyes followed him, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. She could not speak the words of gratitude in a language he would understand, but the message was clear. Aaron yawned softly, curling closer against his mother. Lyra adjusted the blanket around him and whispered again in her language, soft words of comfort that seemed to wrap around him as the warmth of the medbay did. Aaron watched, noticing the calm that had settled over both mother and child. It was a fragile peace, but it was real. For the first time in days, Lyra allowed herself to relax fully. She could feel the warmth of the room, the steady rhythm of her child's breathing, and the quiet presence of the human who had saved them. Though she could not know what the future held, she trusted that they were no longer alone in the frozen world outside. Aaron leaned back in his chair, his eyes closing briefly as exhaustion took hold. He had done what he came to do and more. 2 lives had been saved in a storm that would have claimed many. And as he rested, he knew that trust had been built, a trust between 2 species, and between a mother, her child, and the human who had run through the storm to reach them. Outside, the snow continued to drift softly, but inside the medbay, warmth and hope filled the space. 3 lives rested together, safe for now, and the first small steps toward understanding and connection had begun. The child's quiet breaths and the mother's gentle whispers were a reminder that even in the coldest storms, life could be preserved through courage, patience, and kindness. The medbay was quieter now, the machines humming steadily, filling the space with a soft rhythm. Lyra sat beside her child, brushing Aaron's hair back gently, watching his chest rise and fall with each breath. For the first time since the crash, she felt a small sense of relief. The child's body had begun to recover from the freezing cold, and the warmth of the medbay spread through her own body, easing some of her tension. Aaron remained close, his eyes scanning the monitors in the room, watching every movement of the mother and child. He had seen enough storms, enough broken lives to know that peace in a place like this was fragile. He leaned slightly closer to Aaron, checking the child's breathing and pulse once more. Everything was steady now, but the memory of the frozen plains, the relentless wind, and the darkness outside reminded him that their survival had been nothing short of miraculous. The child stirred, opening his eyes and looking around with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He reached a small hand toward Aaron again. Lyra noticed the gesture and smiled faintly. Slowly, she allowed the child to touch the human's arm, feeling a small but important bridge forming between them. Aaron's hand hovered near Aaron, careful not to overwhelm him, then rested gently against the child's. The small gesture seemed to calm Aaron, who sank back against his mother's chest. Lyra tilted her head, observing the human. His movements were careful, deliberate, full of consideration for a life that was not his own. She had expected fear, perhaps even harm, but all she saw was patience and quiet strength. It was strange, this bond forming between human and alien, a trust that transcended language. Slowly she reached out, placing her free hand lightly on Aaron's arm, a silent acknowledgement of the protection he had given them. Aaron noticed the contact and nodded softly. He did not speak, knowing that words might confuse her. Instead, he offered a small smile, letting his presence convey reassurance. The child watched the exchange with wide eyes, absorbing the warmth and calm that filled the room. After a while, a medic returned, bringing additional supplies and a portable heater. She checked Aaron carefully, adjusting the oxygen mask and monitoring the child's temperature. "He's responding well," she said softly. "If he keeps this up, he'll recover fully. His mother is doing a great job keeping him calm." Lyra's gaze softened at the words, though she did not fully understand them. She continued to whisper softly to her child, words that meant safety, warmth, and comfort. Aaron's small hand reached for her face, pressing lightly against her cheek, and she allowed him to do so, feeling a wave of relief and love wash over her. Aaron watched the quiet scene. His heart lightened despite his exhaustion. He had walked through a storm, risking himself to reach them, and now, seeing the child safe and the mother reassured, he felt a satisfaction he had not known in years. He leaned back slightly, allowing himself a moment to breathe, to take in the fragile peace that surrounded them. The storm outside began to lessen, the wind's howl fading into a distant rumble. Light filtered through the medbay's windows, pale but steady, signaling the day's arrival. Aaron glanced outside, then back at the mother and child. Lyra's eyes met his, and in that quiet moment a shared understanding passed between them. No words were needed. The bond of survival, of care, and of trust had been formed. Aaron yawned softly and nestled deeper into his mother's arms. Lyra adjusted the blanket around him, murmuring words of comfort. Aaron moved closer, keeping his presence gentle and reassuring. Slowly, he reached out, offering his hand toward Lyra again. After a brief hesitation, she touched it lightly, their fingers brushing, and a connection passed between them that was stronger than language or species. The medic stepped back, giving them space while continuing to monitor the child. Aaron and Lyra remained quietly in the room, sitting across from one another, connected by the fragile life between them. Every small movement, every glance spoke volumes. Lyra's hand rested lightly on Aaron, while her free hand occasionally moved toward Aaron in small gestures of trust. Aaron responded in kind, careful not to break the delicate balance they had achieved. As hours passed, the warmth of the medbay spread to all three of them. The child slept peacefully now, his small body finally regaining strength. Lyra leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, feeling a sense of calm that had eluded her since the crash. Aaron allowed himself to rest briefly, knowing they were safe, if only for a while. The bond between them was unspoken but undeniable. A human had crossed a frozen storm to save a life that was not his own, and in doing so, had earned the trust of a mother from another world. Lyra watched him carefully, sensing his quiet strength and compassion. Aaron met her gaze, understanding that the trust she offered was fragile, precious, and earned through courage and care. Outside, the snow continued to drift softly, but inside the medbay, warmth, trust, and hope filled the space. Three lives, human and alien, rested together, bound by survival and compassion. And as the quiet hum of machines surrounded them, the first steps toward understanding and connection between two worlds had begun. The morning light filtered softly through the medbay windows, bringing a gentle warmth that had been absent for days. The storm outside had finally passed, leaving a quiet, pale sky over the frozen plains. Lyra sat with her child in her arms, her eyes following every small movement. Aaron had slept through most of the night, but now he stirred, blinking up at the human who had risked everything to find them. Aaron watched him closely, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion on his face. The child's breathing was steady and strong now, and the warmth of the medbay had done its work. Aaron leaned forward slightly, keeping his hand visible and still, letting the boy observe him. Slowly, Aaron reached out his small hand again, touching Aaron's sleeve lightly. Lyra's eyes widened in surprise. The gesture was small, but to her it meant more than words could say. She pressed closer to her child, whispering in her language, soft words meant for comfort and safety. Aaron responded, curling against her chest, and for the first time she allowed herself to relax fully. The storm, the fear, the endless cold, all of it had passed, and her child was alive. Her heart, heavy with worry for so long, finally felt light. Aaron remained kneeling nearby, observing quietly. He understood the significance of the moment. He had come across a frozen wasteland to save lives not his own, and now he could witness the reward of that effort. The bond forming between mother, child, and human was unspoken but powerful. Trust had been earned, and gratitude flowed silently between them. A medic returned to check Aaron's vitals once more. "He's completely stable," she said with a smile. "If he keeps resting, he'll recover fully. The mother has done an incredible job keeping him calm." Lyra looked at Aaron, trying to find the right words. She didn't speak his language, but she reached out, placing her free hand lightly on his arm. The gesture was simple, but it spoke volumes. Thank you, respect, and trust. Aaron nodded softly, understanding perfectly. Words were not necessary. The warmth in their shared space was enough to convey everything that needed to be said. Outside the medbay, the colony was coming alive. Humans moved quickly, checking systems and maintaining the equipment, but the quiet room held its calm. Aaron opened his eyes fully and looked at the small room, the lights, and then up at Aaron and Lyra. His tiny hand reached toward Aaron once again. Lyra smiled softly and allowed it, understanding that her child had accepted the human as a protector. Aaron responded gently, letting the small fingers brush against his sleeve. Lyra took a deep breath, letting herself feel hope for the first time since the crash. Her people had always told her stories of humans, strong, dangerous, unpredictable. Yet this human had crossed death and storm alike to save her child. He had given them life when it seemed impossible. In her heart, she felt gratitude deeper than words could carry. Aaron moved closer and adjusted the blanket around the child, ensuring he would remain warm. Lyra's hand rested on his, a quiet collaboration of care. She looked at him, and for a moment their eyes met fully. There was understanding there, a bridge between two worlds. Though they did not speak the same language, they both knew what had been risked and gained. The child yawned again and rested against his mother, curling into her embrace. Lyra whispered softly, words of love and comfort, and Aaron listened quietly. He could not understand the language, but the tone, the gentleness, and the emotion were clear. Life had returned to this small room, and in that life a fragile peace had been restored. Hours passed, and the warmth of the medbay spread further. Aaron finally allowed himself to sit back, exhausted but relieved. He had walked through a frozen storm to reach them, risking frostbite and worse, and now, seeing the child safe and the mother reassured, he felt a quiet joy he had not known in years. The bond they shared, though still tentative, had grown stronger with every careful action, every gentle gesture, and every small moment of trust. Outside, the snow had settled over the planet, leaving a pale, calm landscape. The sun's light reflected off the ice, soft and forgiving. The medbay, filled with warmth and life, stood as a small sanctuary amid the endless white. Aaron opened his eyes once more, reaching toward Aaron again. Lyra smiled and allowed it, recognizing that her child had accepted this human fully into his life. Aaron met her gaze, his smile soft and full of understanding. They had survived the storm, and in doing so they had found trust, connection, and a beginning of friendship across worlds. For the first time, Lyra felt hope not only for her child, but for her people. Perhaps humans could be allies, capable of courage and compassion. She pressed her hand gently on Aaron's arm once more, a silent promise of recognition and gratitude. Aaron nodded, knowing that their bond had grown beyond a single act of heroism. As the day progressed, life began to return to normal within the colony. Aaron prepared reports and supplies, but his eyes often returned to the small room where the mother and child rested. Lyra sat quietly with her child, both safe, both alive, both beginning to heal. The warmth of the medbay mirrored the new warmth in their hearts. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, a reminder of the courage it took to reach out to strangers, to risk everything for life. Outside, the world was calm and still. Inside, 3 lives, human and alien, rested together, connected through trust, bravery, and compassion. For Lyra, Aaron, and Aaron, the frozen planet had become a place where hope survived, where bonds were built, and where a human running through a storm had changed everything. The child stirred one last time, pressing close to his mother. Lyra looked at Aaron and whispered in her language, soft and steady, "Thank you." Aaron nodded, understanding completely. The words did not need translation. The meaning was clear. Lives had been saved, trust had been earned, and a new chapter had begun. The sun rose higher, casting pale light through the medbay windows. For the first time in days, there was peace. Outside, the storm's memory faded. Inside, warmth, hope, and connection remained. And in that quiet room, human and alien shared a moment that would last far longer than any storm.